Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing widespread criticism in Israel for holding off on striking Beirut's southern suburbs from both within his cabinet and his opponents. On social media, opposition leader Naftali Bennett said the government had lost control over Israeli sovereignty and that there is chaos in every corner. Far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has posted saying, "This is the time to tell our friend President Trump no." He also said now is the time to do what's required and necessary to strike Hezbollah, to unleash the hands of our fighters and to restore security to the north. Nida Ibrahim has more on the domestic backlash against Netanyahu from Nablus in the occupied West Bank.
According to many politicians, many media analysts talking to several Israeli media, they're saying that Netanyahu has chosen once again his political own interests, his own survival at the expense of the strategic goals that many Israelis were hoping he would achieve against Hezbollah. According to many opposition leaders as well as coalition members who are with Netanyahu, who have been lobbying for him to expand his military assault, to target more targets inside Beirut. Now they're very frustrated. They are criticizing Netanyahu, saying that once again, he chose himself. Let's watch some of this debate on Israeli media.
Israel needs to change its strategy. For every rocket Hezbollah fires at Kiryat Shimona, Tehran should get hit.
Soldiers are falling, wounded and killed. And Israel's prime minister is sitting around waiting for Trump's green light to strike the southern suburbs. Israel is not a banana republic. Flatten Dahir to the ground right now and don't stop until the last building there is rubble.
Netanyahu is currently launching military operations driven by electoral motives to send a clear message to Israelis that Israel has no constraints. But in reality, Israel is constrained in Lebanon, and the Iranians prove that in practice when they said that a successful deal with them requires stopping the bombing of Lebanon.
Let's not forget that Netanyahu had a hidden motive. Yes, he wanted to expand the military assault in Beirut for his own reasons, strategic reasons, trying to reassure communities in northern Israel, but he wanted to derail the talks between the US and Iran, and that's why many believe Trump has made that phone call and threatened him. Even some media is saying that he used the word crazy to describe Prime Minister Netanyahu. In general, it's a day of frustration and criticism of Netanyahu in Israel.
All right, Dan Perry is the former chief of the Associated Press in Europe, Africa and Middle East. He joins us now from Tel Aviv. Dan, did Benjamin Netanyahu back down?
Yeah, clearly. Trump told him to stop operations in Lebanon under certain conditions, and he did. And he basically has no choice because I'm afraid Netanyahu has backed himself into a strategic cul-de-sac where he completely depends on Donald Trump. Now, Israel always had to take into account the U.S. point of view, clearly. Israel depends on the U.S. for diplomatic cover at the UN, for munitions, and all kinds of other things. The U.S. is Israel's critical ally. But Netanyahu took it to a new level by so alienating the Europeans, by so alienating the Democrats, by going to Congress to argue against Barack Obama in 2015, by so alienating normative Republicans by supporting Trump and then betting the farm on Trump. Now that bet seemed to have worked out when Trump somehow got returned to the Oval Office in 2024. But then Netanyahu went even one step further and asked Trump to intervene in his own personal affairs and try to get the Israeli president to cancel his trial, something that doesn't exist under Israeli law. So he is now so in the pocket of Trump that Israel finds itself at new levels of dependency. And yes, when Trump said back down, Netanyahu backed down. He scarcely has any other choice because at this point, without Trump, Israel has few allies it can depend on, and possibly at this particular point with Netanyahu in power, none.
OK, to broaden this out, you talk about Israel's allies and where it sits in its international relations. But given that Netanyahu, under his leadership, Israel now controls 70% of Gaza, It's managed to encroach further into southern Syria. It currently, today, occupies nearly a fifth of Lebanon. Do you not have to give some credit to a political leader who appears to have very deftly navigated fairly controversial incursions in wartime?
Yeah, Netanyahu gets some credit for all kinds of things, and he can claim that Hamas has been weakened, that Hezbollah has been weakened, and that the Iranian regime has been weakened. But on the other hand, in all three cases, he promised absolute victory and that Hamas would be annihilated, that Hezbollah would be gone, and that the Iranian regime would fall. Moreover, you have to weigh whatever accomplishments have been achieved, and probably the number one accomplishment was the return of the living among the 250 hostages, against the fact that for its trouble, and because the wars were so brutal, Israel is now very badly internationally isolated, facing various boycotts, formal and informal. Netanyahu himself is wanted for war crimes at The Hague and can't go to various countries in Europe. Things are pretty bad for Israel on the world stage, and they may get worse if Trump is rendered a lame duck by the midterm elections, or if a Democrat returns to the White House in 2024. I wouldn't say that it nets out to a strategic victory, although, sure, they've taken over some land. You have to remember that contrary to what you sometimes hear in fora that are unfriendly to Israel and think the worst of it, Israelis don't want to occupy Lebanon and don't want to occupy any part of Gaza. They want to be rid of the threats from those areas. And at least in the case of Lebanon, the Lebanese government essentially supports Israel's goal of getting rid of Hezbollah. So it's a complex situation, but the occupations in and of themselves are not necessarily a boon. Israeli soldiers in Lebanon are dying because they're in Lebanon, where they're seen by much of the world as legitimate targets. I think alternatives existed over the past 2.5 years since October 7th, and Netanyahu's betting the farm on Trump and deciding to go purely with a strategy based on force with absolutely no diplomatic leg whatsoever, in the final analysis has backfired.
Dan, can I talk to you about domestically then? Because you have mentioned Israeli soldiers are losing their lives. The Iranian regime still stands. Hezbollah has not been wiped out. And now elections are due in just a few months' time. Benjamin Netanyahu no doubt will be acutely aware of that looming deadline. Presumably, going into campaigning while going into war has to be a carefully executed decision. Has he made the right call?
I think he made the wrong call. I think alternatives, as I say, were available to Israel that would have yielded a better situation that might have rendered him more re-electable in the elections that are likely to be held in October. But at the end of the day, he was always going to face an uphill battle because his effort to Putinize Israel in 2023 backfired, sending half the country into the streets because they didn't buy the idea that the government should have no limits on its power, like in Russia. And then, of course, Netanyahu presided over the disaster of October 7th, which sometimes gets minimized. But that was a barbaric assault on Jews because they're Jews, such as the world has not seen since World War II. And this happened after Netanyahu, for months, refused to meet his security chiefs, who told him that something was brewing, but he would not meet with them. His indifference, his callousness, his myopia strategically have led directly to where the situation is. And so it's no surprise that all the polls show him behind by about 20 seats in a 120-seat Knesset. The polls basically show the opposition with 70 seats and Netanyahu's coalition with 50. And that coalition includes about a third who are extremely religious Haredi Jews. So if you look at non-Haredi Israel, because the Haredim are kind of a ghetto, I think he's basically as supportive maybe a quarter or less. That's pretty bad, and it may not be overcomable no matter what happens in Lebanon. But you're right, I think, in what you imply, that his only hope is to somehow change the narrative, and that could come from a continued state of emergency or from some Hail Mary pass militarily, I use an American football metaphor, with Iran or with Hezbollah that might somehow yield a decisive picture of victory. And so his probable desire is to continue the war because he has no other path to victory. And that puts him at loggerheads with Trump, who obviously has decided that this is not worth sacrificing his majority in Congress in the midterms, which is where things are probably headed in the U.S. So Trump wants to end this somehow, even if that involves, shamefully, a capitulation to the criminal regime in Iran. And Netanyahu wants the opposite.
OK. You referred to polling numbers in Israel domestically at the moment. Now, polls have been wrong before. They are steep odds, but polls have been wrong before. So given all of the points that you have just made, and you're maybe putting aside feelings about Netanyahu's performance so far, can he send the public a message that gets him re-elected?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Can Netanyahu sell the public an idea between now and October that does get him re-elected, given that the discussion you and I have had so far paints a portrait of a leader who will struggle given everything that the country is up against, politically, domestically and internationally? The
polls aren't wrong. The polls in Israel generally off by 1 or 2 percentage points, much like in the States. So when you're behind by this much, you're going to lose, unless things change. He can do various political machinations, like try to establish another party that is secretly allied with him, but will pretend otherwise, to draw in, discontented people on the right, but then reunite with him. He can do, shenanigans like that. It's unlikely to work. There's already been an attempt, and it shows that party not getting into the Knesset. But major geopolitical earthquakes could change the picture. Let's suppose the Iranian regime actually falls somehow. That would be dramatic, and that would render him again electable. Let's suppose the Lebanese government somehow changes course or invites Israel to collaborate with it somehow, something dramatic, and they take on Hezbollah together. Hard to imagine, but that would certainly change the picture. Also, some massive diplomatic coup. If Trump succeeds in, as part of his, as I say, capitulation to the Iranians, throws Israel a bone and gets Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Indonesia to normalize relations with Israel, yeah, that would change things. But unless something as dramatic as what I'm describing occurs, Netanyahu is very likely to be turfed out in October.
Dan Perry, former chief of the Associated Press for Europe, Africa and Middle East, thank you very much for your time.